They're actually here, they're tokenizing on a daily basis. There's new products launching, new assets being tokenized, brought on chain. Wells Fargo, BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, they're hiring digital asset managers left and right. They're building platforms proactively. So we're kind of right now, for the first time ever, in an institutional bull run in crypto.
Today's episode, we have Michael, the founder of Cosmoverse and co-founder of Stakecito. This will be, of course, a special episode because, after all, we are at Beyond Cosmoverse, which is the official podcast of Cosmoverse, which is a platform specializing in connecting institution and blockchain infrastructure. Michael has a very interesting journey because his roots is not like the usual founder. It's actually rooted in content creation, community building, and a lot of this has to where he started. So, Michael, I think we can start by how you got your interest in the blockchain space, where actually you started your journey in this industry.
Yeah, I started in early of 2017 at a university, discovered a Bitcoin white paper, and believed that within 1 year, crypto would change the whole banking system and that everything would be obsolete. So I was immediately all in on the idea of separating money from state, sovereign finance, and also just building up a new system that empowers the people.
Reading the white paper, which white paper you actually read first when that gave you this will to enter this space?
There was a Bitcoin white paper. I mean, in the beginning, it was everything around Bitcoin. You know, altcoins at that time were already around, and I felt like I was already super late to that. But yeah, it was Bitcoin for a long time, actually, that I was only into Bitcoin for most of 2017. But then towards the end of 2017, I got also into altcoins and learned about it, invested money, lost all of it within 6 months. So I guess, yeah, that was the 2017 school of crypto adoption that got me in.
So what did you say? Like, if your experience was not great, what actually makes you think that this was an industry that deserved your attention and your time and your focus?
I think because it was something new, something different, because before I heard about it or learned about it, I was working at Mercedes-Benz for 3 years in business administration. I did an apprenticeship program for like 3 years. And it was just something that I kind of didn't want to pursue as my career, right? Like a very standard middle class, I'm originally from Germany, so that's like the standard path that you go. And learning about Bitcoin and then also understanding that there's a whole industry being built around it, for me was from the beginning something that I found very interesting as ultimately as a career option as well. So I think that's what made me like curious about it. And also the people that I met initially, right? Like I started going to events, I started connecting with people. I think
this is actually a very key point because this year we are doing the conference in Hong Kong, but the place where everything started for you is in Shanghai. So there is that parallel right now where things have started and where we are going now. And this is the most important thing. Like you started when the industry was going from just beginning to be considered dead by everyone. So at that point of time, you weren't saying, okay, this is a space that is successful. I can definitely stay here because I will also be successful. Like that was literally a bet on something that was failing at the time. So what did you saw in those meetings in Shanghai, the people that encountered? What led you think, okay, this is actually the future of the financial system?
Yeah, so when I said that I learned about it as a student, I was a student in Germany, but I studied Mandarin and Chinese economics. So I had an exchange year in China integrated, which led me to Shanghai eventually. And then there, I really understood that even in China, people talk about crypto, even in Shanghai, like one of the biggest financial hubs in the world. And there were a lot of events back then. So yeah, I think for me, that was just the first time that I saw, people in larger scales, also from traditional industries coming together to learn about crypto, to connect. And for me, like as somebody who has not had a long career in finance, as you said, I'm not a classic entrepreneur. I didn't have 10 startups before. But for me to see a face behind a coin, I think that was something I felt very excited about, to see that, there's someone behind MakerDAO and back then Cardano and Ethereum, to meet developers for the first time. That was the early days in Shanghai in 2018, which also led me to co-found Crypto Mondays, which was like a community platform that still exists, not anymore in Shanghai, but was very community, grassroots, getting connected, having beers, and networking. It was a great time, 2017, 18.
And I think that was like the beautiful part of that period because that was a time where actually everyone you were speaking with was open to chat about this blockchain revolution, even if they were coming from a different ecosystem, because we have been in the past year towards more a PvP environment between ecosystems. But it was actually a time where everyone was contributing. And I found very interesting that already at that time you started this initiative of gathering people, connecting with people, because I think there is a real value in this kind of connection that you build when you are in person and you can share ideas very early. Do you think that exchange that you had with people really give you a different perspective from what you had before, this path towards building and creating and founding into the blockchain industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when I was alone, just at home from my laptop, reading those papers and signing up on Bittrex back then, you fall into those traps, right? For example, BitConnect back then was huge, right? It was the top 10. And when I started going to events, you could exchange with people, and it was like, oh yeah, this is a scam. And like, I wish when I got into crypto that I already had access to a community, people in my city that I can just ask questions, and hey, what do you think about this, about that? So I think to this date I really believe in physical meetings and events, because it helped me a lot in my early journey in crypto to navigate much better and avoid a lot of the scams and traps and all these kind of things. And just connecting people, I think there's a lot of value in that, even to this date. And like you said, right, like back then there was a lot less tribalism. People were more friendly, more openly to new people. Nowadays it's a bit more camp A versus camp B, but I think we still try to represent those original values of embracing and welcoming new people and giving everybody a place to feel they're welcome.
I think this is a very deep thought, and also getting into something that I also personally think is very important, which is connecting with people around the world and not only on your specific nation. Because of course, when we speak about countries, there is also internal narratives which also specific to an industry. So a perspective that is in Europe can be totally different from a perspective that is in the United States. And in Asia, those are very different market. And with industry like digital asset and blockchain, there is a lot of differentiation. So I can totally see that this kind of approach that you did by creating this different perspective, developing a critical thinking over how the industry is evolving, is actually super meaningful, and probably part of the of why Cosmoverse change location every year. But before tapping into Cosmoverse, we have to do one step before, which the entry into the Cosmos ecosystem, which I found extremely fascinating, because it's also a story that I share on how I get started. So you basically went on Twitter with curiosity, hey, what's Cosmos? And someone replied. Can you guide me to how actually everything started in Cosmos?
Yeah, so during that time, I was a true believer in the altcoin market. At some point, I noticed, I was doing some housekeeping and I saw I had some Atom in my wallet. I don't know why. But then, as you said, at that time, I already started the Cryptocito YouTube channel just to get videos going, and started to be more active on Twitter, which I have never really used before. And then I just made a tweet and I said, hey, can somebody explain me what Cosmos is? Because I have some Atom in my wallet. And then Jack Sempolin, big shout out, he replied immediately, went on a call with me, walked me through, and this is off camera. He had no incentive to do that, but he just took his time and walked me through IBC and interoperability. And for me, it really resonated a lot, because it was that time when Bitcoin maximalism was kind of starting and got a bit annoying for me. So I was like, isn't there going to be an internet of blockchains, like a lot of coins coexisting, and isn't it too early to pick a winner yet? Maybe Bitcoin won for money, but there will be app layers, there will be different verticals and niches. And then Cosmos really represented at the best at the time. And people like Jack Sempolin and Sunny and Ethan and Zaki and everyone really welcomed me with open arms. And that was my entry. Just super random, but felt very welcoming. And the developer community walked me through and onboarded me to the ecosystem.
The fact that someone working actually at a protocol level into a company just jump on you the call without knowing you, without actually knowing the value that you could bring to the ecosystem, it's something very unique in those early time in Cosmos, which I think was one of the most welcoming ecosystem for its nature of having a different mission from others. So connecting rather than competing, expanding rather than concentrating within one specific protocol. The contribution that you did to Cosmos, not only from an awareness perspective, but also in connecting people within its own ecosystem, because these people that were working remotely, not ever connecting. And what you did was getting all these people and for the first time meeting each other, connecting. And that, I think, where the idea of Cosmoverse started. So can you guide me through how you went from being a content creator, a community builder, to actually founding a company and starting one of the conferences long-lasting in the market through multiple editions?
Yes, so before I was a content creator, I was doing events in Shanghai, right? I mentioned earlier briefly Crypto Mondays, but Crypto Mondays was actually an events platform. And in the beginning, it was just, a few guys renting a WeWork space in Shanghai, and every other Monday, so twice a month, we just got one panel together, we got some beers, and that was the early days of crypto events back in the days. But then that evolved into a step in between that and Cosmoverse, which was called La Conexión, which I founded together with a Colombian friend who I met in China. And he said, man, we have to do what we do in Shanghai, but in Colombia. So with him, we went to Colombia and to Argentina, and we actually did 2 events there. And that was kind of the test net for Cosmoverse, which eventually, as you've mentioned, at that time, I then was all in on Cosmos, and while we were all connected with a community of builders and founders. And then it was just a natural next step because I had some event experience. I had the network through the media platform, through Cryptocito. I also really enjoyed the ecosystem. And it was also the first time after COVID that we could do events. So everything kind of came together back then in Lisbon, Portugal. And as you said, the vision in the early days was for the first edition of Cosmoverse was to get the smartest and best developers in one room, lock the doors for 2 days, and let them figure it out. Like that was the early goal. And I think what came out of that was actually very powerful that even I underestimated, I think, in hindsight.
Can you guide me to what it felt like? You know all these people from interviews, and suddenly all these big contributors are all in front of you, you are connecting with them. What exceeded your expectation? What you felt actually maybe went wrong? How was that first experience?
It was overwhelming because we were planning for just one day, maybe 200-300 people, and then we had to add a second day. It became 700 plus people. Jack Sempolin, who onboarded me, flew in from the West Coast in the US to Portugal, and just seeing him for the first time and seeing some of the founders and really big names in the industry, right? I mean, Carl Samani back then was there, even Do Kwon, he was at the first edition, and back then Terra was just a multi-billion-dollar giant project, right? And just seeing them organically show up to our event was incredible. So it was definitely overwhelming. I also underestimated that because for putting together an event of that size, it's just a lot of logistical overhead, operational overhead, planning, and every detail needs to be pre-organized, right? So you can't fix anything on the spot at that scale. So it was also a lot of fun. And I think that's why why I kept going. That's why we kept building the team and growing the reach and the brand. And yeah, because it's very rewarding to see if people fly in, people having a great time, people saying, hey, I found a new job, or I've made a new partnership, I onboarded a new client. So there was also a very strong ROI. And I think from that perspective also, it was very good to see that it was not only like a nice to have, shake hands and everything is fine, but actual business was made. And that's also the real value of those events.
I think one of the most important aspects was the feeling of starting to understand what actually was being built. Because when you do that digitally, remotely, it's a thing. When you are there, and you understand what is being built, when it comes to that realization, really push you to commit even more and to start to build from that point? Like, how do you see the evolution of the space anchored to your values?
Yes, I mentioned earlier when I learned about Bitcoin, read the white paper, those 9 pages back then, it's all about the cypherpunk movement, separating money from state, empowering the people, right? Those are the OG values that I, even to this date, I still believe in, right? And I think that's the big revolution of cryptocurrencies and blockchains is true decentralization and a sovereign money in the end of the day. Now, with this new direction, which kind of only really started to show in the past 8-9 months, right? Is like institutional adoption. They're actually here. They're tokenizing on a daily basis. There's new products launching, new assets being tokenized, brought on chain. Wells Fargo, BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, they're hiring digital asset managers left and right. They're building platforms proactively. So we're kind of right now, for the first time ever, in an institutional bull run in crypto, whereas the retail side is completely washed out. But I think there will be a middle ground where the OG cypherpunk and rooted in Bitcoin values will be embedded into the current monetary system and hopefully lead to a more decentralized world. But we also have to be real on how the financial markets and institutional capital moves and operates, and it will not be switched from one day to another. It will be a gradual process, and I think we're very well positioned right now with customers, with media, with everything that we're doing to provide a platform for those conversations to happen. So when we talk about compliance and regulation, it's needed for BlackRock to bring in $100 billion into this industry. And we need to talk about this in a public discourse, ideally also with people representing the OG crypto values, because otherwise, if we are not part of that conversation, it will end up worse for our industry. So people like Brian Armstrong and Coinbase, what they're doing, even Brett Garlinghouse from Ripple, they're proactively seeking these conversations. And I think we as customers, we are providing the platform for that. That's how I see it. It's a merge. It's not an either or. It's not you have to choose. It's going to merge, and we're seeing that right now.
Actually, institutions are here, and there was a massive institutional shift in the past year, which wasn't easy because this led to a lot of transformation, to people leaving the space, and this also goes very well with the fact that this industry is evolving. So the question is, when this institutional shift happened, as Cosmoverse, how you adapted to the industry and how it was evolving?
If you look at our lineup last year in Croatia, compared it to the 2021 lineup in Lisbon, you probably noticed that just by the type of speakers that we had on stage. And we had the European Central Bank and
how was that actually like how it was for you going from interacting with founders of blockchain companies to the European Central Bank, which is a completely different audience compared to your previous conferences?
It's a whole different experience. I mean, I'm used to just, cold DM someone on Twitter or Telegram and just say, hey, you want to be a speaker? And now you have the European Central Bank and coordinate with them, set up meetings weeks in advance and answer very detailed questions. So it's a whole different level in terms of the communications. But I think it's also a sign that our industry is maturing, and the fact that they are interested to speak at a crypto native conference, because even to this date, we're still crypto native, just now with a much stronger focus on the institutional side. But the fact that they're actually open and responsive is an interesting sign. And I think the main value for those type of events is that they also come to learn and to engage with experienced blockchain veterans, to ask them questions like, what do you think about CBDCs and how that coexists and how they will impact finance? In most cases, actually, they also just come to learn. And that's a big opportunity for us, that we as an industry, digital asset industry, need to also understand that it's kind of responsibility as well to talk to them and have that public dialogue. So it's a whole different experience from a conference side. A lot more detail needs to go into planning, a lot more compliance constraints.
Yeah, and I think that there is one aspect that is underrated, which is in that year Cosmos was one of the first to adapt to this evolution, because right now, especially in 2026, like everyone is moving towards an institutional focus when it comes to their setup. In that sense, Cosmoverse was ahead. Basically, in 2025, you had Revolut, Visa, European Central Bank, Austrian National Bank, all these that for the first time were interacting with the blockchain industry, and that's also where the tone for this year goes, which is taking that experience and pushing it forward by continuing that connection, because those institutions have the trust of everyday people to trust their payment system, to trust their money. At the same time, you have blockchain technology, which is still very new, and they have to figure it out which is the best blockchain rails, the best platform you can rely on, and that's where the focus for this year goes. Maybe you can describe how you actually figured out there was this new focus in the industry, and how you are concretely realizing that kind of goal of connecting institution with blockchain infrastructure.
I think we definitely laid a very strong foundation last year in Croatia. As you mentioned, not only the organizations, but also the regulators that were there, security commissions from all over the Central and Eastern European region. When we talk about MiCA compliance. And the interesting thing in Hong Kong and APAC as a whole region is that it's just a much more advanced and more scalable environment, meaning a lot larger addressable market. Hong Kong is very, very well advanced when it comes to framing the policy around tokenization. Also, the local and regional banks and institutions and fintechs are all quite on top of the game when it comes to that. So yeah, right now we're just in a phase where we see where the market is going. We understand that we need to also adapt to that new market reality without sacrificing any of our earlier work and earlier values that we established and that our company and philosophy is still rooted in. Sovereignty, interoperability still underneath, but also understanding that institutions are here. They're actively building, deploying, hiring, launching products, and we need to have them on our stage with the infrastructure providers. So yeah, I think the feedback we're getting so far is extremely positive.
So now I will go with a very difficult question, because it's 2026, so we cannot talk about all everything is happening geopolitically, because it changed the perspective of where the industry is going. You have Europe, they are working towards the digital euro. They are looking to have the digital euro as a settlement. And actually, this is something that Cosmoverse attendees saw early at our conference, because the panel that we had in the first day was about presenting the digital euro and how it can interact with blockchain infrastructure. So you have Europe, the United States, you have the Clarity Act, the validation of stablecoins to be used broadly, and it's currently playing out in a way that the dollar is still the stablecoin that is dominant in the blockchain industry, and that of course facilitates the distribution across the world. But we can say that also other parts of the world are catching up. We have China with the digital yuan, which is also making strides of adoption and continuing iteration across the markets. And all this paints a picture which basically there is a question of which can be the reserve currency of the world. And of course there is also Bitcoin in play. So it's very interesting from this perspective, because there is a complete transformation of how we think about currencies across different parts of the world. So why do you think Hong Kong play a very important part on this discussion of where money is going in our century? Where do you think Hong Kong matters as a place to having a discussion about this kind of future for money?
Hong Kong has a very advanced banking sector, and some people consider it as like a sandbox for China specifically, because obviously there's very close relationships between mainland and Hong Kong. But I think the authorities in Hong Kong and the conversations we're having with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority or Invest Hong Kong, which is one of their government bodies as well, the Hong Kong Tourism Board and the Tech and Science Department, they're all very embracive. So the conversations I have and we have as a company with those type of organizations are very, very supportive. They want to have more visibility also on a global stage, because they have well-structured framework on how to classify digital assets, regulation around it. That is on the
Yes,
highest government
they
level,
have an
right?
upcoming custodian license, which will most likely go live this year. They have a stablecoin license. So actually, from a regulation standpoint, they definitely are on pair with what's happening also in the United States.
Yeah, 100%. And I think Hong Kong is really the gate into Asia. Similar how Singapore was, or maybe still is, but I think Singapore is quite a saturated market. And Hong Kong, I think, is very strong positioned. And again, the government is just very open to meeting everyone from global family offices, large funds, of course, to small startup entrepreneurs, right? Like anybody with an idea in digital assets, infrastructure, of course, also the intersection with AI, that's also very interesting. They're actually very embracing and open to
Yeah,
connect
and I
and
think
make
this is
everything
also
work.
like based on your first iteration in Hong Kong, which was this February with Cosmoverse Connect. Specifically, there was participation from the public sector with Invest Hong Kong and the various government bodies. How that conversation went, and it confirmed some of your ideas.
Normally, if you do a side event during a busy week like Consensus, which was the case in February, the attention span is very, very limited and people just jump from one thing to another. But was very, very interesting to see, the meetings that we set up prior to this event, and also the invitations we've sent out to join our event, that people actually showed up. And that's not very common. We've been doing events for many years in many places around the world. And when you're in talks with government officials and they say, oh yeah, sure, we'll come, it's mostly like a polite way to say, I'm busy, I'm not going to make it. But for example, the Hong Kong Tourism Board, they actually came to our event with a small delegation. We had a meeting with them, sitting down during our event. Same for HK Invest, the Science and Technology Department. There were like 3 or 4 government agencies at our event, and they stayed from the beginning to almost the end. And that's very strong signaling. They actually care and they want to do business. They want to have more companies in Hong Kong. And yeah, I think that's a big differentiator to most other jurisdictions in the world.
Hong Kong is in the top 3 along London and New York, so it's definitely a city that needs to keep up with the digital asset, especially now that tokenization is expanding across commercial banks and more traditional institutions. And we are seeing this adoption unfolding all across the globe. I want to go back to your founder profile, because on pair with Cosmoverse, you're actually doing a lot of things, which to me it's always insane, I would say. You're still doing content creation. You are organizing a digital asset summit that has very important institutions interacting with blockchain infrastructure, but you're also running your own blockchain infrastructure with the Stakecito, which has a very important number, like over 200,000 delegators. And how is that, like how you are managing to keep going with this founder mode where you have all this commitment at the same time?
I think it's a lot about obviously people that you have around. So for the validator infrastructure side of things, we are a small team but a very productive team. Obviously, I have a CTO there. It's also like a technical component that I do not have deep knowledge and experience in, but this is a company I have 2 co-founders in. But it's been I think in the end of the day, it's very interesting to see from someone who made crypto his career decision to also see the industry from different angles and perspectives, right? Because media and events are very like soft skills. It's more about connecting people. Then running Stakecito is more of an infrastructure, and you see actually also how the tech works to a degree, to my limited understanding of it. But yeah, running the server infrastructure, doing upgrades in the middle of the night, no matter if it's a public holiday or a weekend or whatever. Yeah, it's a different experience, and also makes you understand that blockchains in the end of the day are just lines of code, right? That's all it is. And then everything around it is just also the narrative, the positioning, the brand, the storytelling, to a large degree, the community that is forming around it. But underneath, the code doesn't care actually at all about any of this, right? And there's governance discussions. So it's a very interesting journey. I think, again, it's all about the people to make this work. I also see a very close interconnection between the 3 companies. So in the same way how we believe in the values of sovereignty and interoperability, the same way these three organizations are structured. They're kind of sovereign, but they're all interconnected. The numbers you mentioned around the validators, around 200,000 unique delegators, and in the peak, around $400-500 million assets under delegation, you can say. I think it's all connected for sure. The media, the conference, and the validator. But in the end of the day, it's good to see also like different angles on the industry.
This goes towards one of the most interesting aspect of your journey, which I can also relate, because one thing that we have in common is our roots in the community. Because when you come from the community, you're also more subject to, how can I say, opinions. And definitely that's something that you had to navigate through the years, being, I would say, constantly judged by even strong opinions, because you came from interacting with a lot of people every day. Then, of course, you are someone that they can relate more, that they can actually see also themselves or something that they could have done from that perspective. So how you see actually that journey from starting as a community builder towards founding companies, towards being exposed to the opinion on Twitter, on X, how that was in the past years?
It was not easy. It was a lot of very hard lessons to learn when it comes to trusting people. I mentioned earlier how important it is to have the right people around you, right? People in your company, people in your close environment, trusted people. And I'm emphasizing that because I've learned that the hard way, that if you do not have that setup or you trust the wrong people, then it can end very badly. And I think every like startup founder at some point or needs to experience that to fully understand. So that's one thing. Also, specifically in crypto, because it is such a fast moving industry and the market that you have today might be gone tomorrow. You need to adapt or you die. And that's also very hard business decisions that need to be made. Which I'm also learning the hard way, but it's just part of that journey, I guess. And yeah, but it's definitely not been easy. And in terms of also the public noise, I mean, for someone who has been in the front lines, you know, when you're creating videos, when you're on the stage, you're kind of in the front lines. You affiliate that face to the company, to a project, to an ecosystem. So if things go well, you have positivity, but if things go bad or not well, then it's the opposite. And you get a lot of accusations and narratives, and obviously Twitter and those kind of places, social media, social networks are can be very cruel places as well.
Yeah,
but I feel like
and you mentioned yourself that surviving in our space is the most underrated thing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like surviving in crypto is the single most underrated achievement. Yeah, I believe that as a company, as a creator, yeah, that's something I learned also the hard way. And I guess there will be challenges in the future as well that I can't even predict right now. But I also learned to live with it more and more. So there will be people that do not like you, whether it's competitors, whether it's just people that just don't like you. So yeah, I think it's just part of the journey. And if you look at the most successful entrepreneurs, companies out there, or politicians, I mean, everybody has people that support them and people that don't. Yeah, if you put it into bigger context, I think it's a normal part of the cycle.
Considering that now you are entering in a phase of your age where you actually can share recommendation to the younger generation. So I'm not calling you old, but we're basically there. We are navigated veterans of this space at this point. So what will be like your recommendation to someone that actually wants to get started now in this space, that want to follow your journey and try to build something meaningful?
Yeah, I mean, if you asked me that a few years ago, I would just say something like, just get started, find something you have passion in, and that still counts today. My advice now would be totally different. It would actually be, maybe because I flipped 30 2 years ago already, but it's actually be very careful about the people you trust and people that you surround yourself with. When I started in crypto, I was in my early 20s. I was very curious. I was very excited about it. But that excitement also comes with
everyone is naive at the start, like that's a natural.
Yeah, so and that gets exploited sooner or later, 100%. I don't know anyone who is like that and didn't make make that experience. From the beginning, especially if you have an idea to create a company, in most cases, you do not need a co-founder. You do not need someone to start this with, unless it's something technical, right? Then you need to bring soft skills, the other person brings some technical skills. But in most cases, you don't really need that. So that would be my number one advice or learning, I would say, from my own experience. Be very careful about the people you trust.
I think it will be natural making mistakes. It's inevitable that you have to make some learnings during your journey. But I think that in the end, what your journey and your story tells is actually like consistency and coherence between your values, your vision. So I think that the younger Michael that are now entering the space can get a lot of learnings from this kind of recommendation. By going through this conversation, what I noticed was this strong excitement by speaking about the early days and those interactions. But it's also natural because that has a stronger impact on your journey when you are new to something. But what actually makes you still excited today? Something that keeps you awake at night, that it continues to keep going, because keep going after everything this industry has experienced over the years, it's not easy. I would say that 95% of people gave up through the years. So what actually keeps you going? It's my final question.
Yeah, also very good question. I think it's just a deep conviction that I have, a very deep conviction in what I'm doing, on what we're doing as a company, as a team. Also the fact that, I did take a few business decisions over the years that made me grow as a founder and a company owner, and all the learnings that I had over the years. I think just applying those learnings has me or gets me excited. And now in 2026, we have a lot of new tools, and there's Claude and there's AI and there's all these different tools that we have available now that can actually scale our output a lot faster. And I think that's just applying the learnings that I had over the years. I wish I knew these things 3, 4, 5 years ago that I knew today, but those things only come with experiencing it. But yeah, I think just a deep conviction that I built up in the early days of studying all these white papers, getting back to that, going to events, meeting people, and still having faith in that there are people out there who I will meet in the future in Hong Kong this November in Cosmoverse, of course, that we'll meet, that will be grateful, that will be that will have an impact on their career paths. And I think that is still more rewarding than giving up and saying like, man, I got punched so hard, I will not continue. So I think it's a mixture of those. But yeah, it's definitely, we're going to be around and not surrender.
Thank you for your final answer. I think it's very important for the audience to know this perspective, because this will actually help everyone in their journey. Definitely the people that want to have this real connection, because in an era where AI is intensifying, connecting with people in-person setup is getting very meaningful and important. So this can happen through Cosmoverse, but also through the various summits that are happening around the world. And it's important to have that connection, because as a human, we get to learn a lot by real person interaction. And you have a lot to tell about this, because basically these past years really have been shaped by the people that you met through the various editions of Cosmoverse. So thank you for coming today, for making the time. It was a pleasure to having this conversation, and I hope that the audience will get insight from this conversation. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.